In December 2022, Israeli archaeologist Dr. Yardenna Alexandre made an announcement that stunned the international archaeological community. After 15 years of excavations beneath the modern city of Nazareth, her team had uncovered what she described as the most complete picture of first-century Palestinian village life ever discovered. But what made this discovery truly extraordinary wasn't just the remarkable preservation of ancient buildings, tools, and everyday objects. It was how these findings completely challenged popular assumptions about Jesus' childhood and revealed shocking details about his early formation that most Christians have never heard. According to Dr. Alexandre, the archaeological evidence suggests that Jesus of Nazareth grew up in a far more sophisticated, cosmopolitan, and educationally rich environment than traditional depictions have suggested, with access to knowledge, training, and cultural influences that would have prepared him remarkably well for his later ministry. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond academic archaeology. For nearly 2,000 years, Christians have wondered about the silent years of Jesus' life, the period between his appearance as a 12-year-old in the temple and the beginning of his public ministry at age 30. The Gospel writers provide almost no information about these 18 crucial years of development, leaving believers to speculate about how Jesus prepared for his world-changing mission. Some have imagined him living in rural isolation, learning only basic carpentry skills in an obscure village. Others have wondered if he traveled to distant lands to study with Eastern mystics or ancient philosophers. But the archaeological evidence emerging from Nazareth suggests a reality that is both more mundane and more remarkable than either extreme. Today we're going to explore what these groundbreaking archaeological discoveries reveal about Jesus' early environment, education, and preparation for ministry. We'll examine how recent excavations have revolutionized our understanding of first-century Nazareth, what the physical evidence tells us about daily life in Jesus' childhood home, and why these findings matter profoundly for understanding both the human and divine aspects of Christ's preparation for his redemptive mission. This isn't speculation or theological interpretation, but hard archaeological evidence that provides unprecedented insight into the formative years of the most influential person in human history. The first shocking discovery that emerged from the Nazareth excavations was the size and sophistication of the village during Jesus' lifetime. For centuries, scholars assumed that Nazareth was an insignificant hamlet, so small and remote that it barely qualified as a village. This assumption seemed to be supported by Nathanael's dismissive question in John's Gospel, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" But archaeological evidence reveals that first-century Nazareth was actually a thriving agricultural center with a population of approximately 400–500 people, making it a medium-sized village by ancient Palestinian standards. More importantly, the village showed clear signs of prosperity, organization, and cultural sophistication that would have provided a rich environment for a young person's intellectual and spiritual development. The excavations uncovered evidence of extensive terraced agriculture, sophisticated water management systems, and stone buildings that required considerable engineering skill to construct. The quality of pottery, tools, and decorative objects found in first-century layers indicates that Nazareth's residents had access to goods and cultural influences from across the Mediterranean world. This wasn't the isolated, backward village that many have imagined, but a prosperous community strategically located along important trade routes that connected the Sea of Galilee with Mediterranean coastal cities. Jesus would have grown up exposed to diverse languages, cultures, and ideas flowing through these commercial networks. Perhaps even more significant was the discovery of what archaeologists call the Nazareth Synagogue Complex, the remains of a substantial building that served as both synagogue and educational center during the first century. The structure shows clear evidence of regular use for communal worship, religious instruction, and scholarly debate. Stone benches arranged around the perimeter could accommodate dozens of people, while a raised platform in the center provided space for Torah, reading, and teaching. The building's size and elaborate construction indicate that Nazareth's Jewish community was committed to serious religious education and sophisticated theological discussion. This is the environment where Jesus would have received his early religious training and where he first learned to interpret Scripture with the depth and authority that later amazed temple scholars in Jerusalem. The synagogue complex contained what archaeologists identified as a study hall or bet midrash, where advanced students would engage in intensive scripture study and rabbinical debate. Stone writing tablets, inkwells, and fragments of scrolls found in this area suggest that some form of formal education was available to promising young people in 1st century Nazareth. This discovery fundamentally challenges the assumption that Jesus grew up with limited access to education or scholarly training. Instead, the archaeological evidence suggests he had opportunities for intensive religious study that would have been remarkable for someone from his socio-economic background. But the most surprising discovery was evidence of what researchers initially called the workshop quarter, a section of the village dedicated to skilled craftsmanship and manufacturing. Contrary to popular assumptions about ancient Palestinian villages being primarily agricultural, 1st century Nazareth showed clear signs of specialization in several sophisticated crafts. The excavations uncovered the remains of workshops for stonework, metalworking, pottery, textile production, and what archaeologists now believe was advanced woodworking that went far beyond simple carpentry. The tools, techniques, and finished products found in these workshops indicate that Nazareth's craftsmen were producing goods for regional and possibly international markets. This finding completely transforms our understanding of Jesus' occupational training. The Greek word tekton, used to describe both Jesus and Joseph in the Gospels, has traditionally been translated as carpenter, but the archaeological evidence suggests this translation is far too narrow. A 1st century tekton in a village like Nazareth would have been more accurately described as a skilled craftsman, contractor, or even engineer, capable of working with wood, stone, and metal to construct everything from furniture and agricultural tools to houses and public buildings. The sophistication of the construction techniques, evident in 1st century Nazareth, suggests that Jesus learned skills and acquired knowledge that prepared him to understand complex building processes, architectural principles, and project management, all of which would later inform his teaching about spiritual construction and kingdom building. The workshop quarter also revealed evidence of extensive interaction with Greek and Roman culture, tools showing Hellenistic design influences, Latin inscriptions on some artifacts, and architectural elements borrowed from classical traditions indicate that Nazareth's craftsmen were far from isolated from the broader cultural currents of their time. Jesus would have grown up in an environment where Jewish religious tradition coexisted with Greek philosophical concepts and Roman administrative efficiency. This multicultural exposure helps explain his later ability to communicate effectively with people from diverse backgrounds and his sophisticated understanding of both Jewish and Gentile worldviews. Dr. Alexandre's team made another remarkable discovery in what they identified as the residential quarter of 1st century Nazareth. The excavations uncovered several well-preserved houses that provided unprecedented insight into domestic life during Jesus' childhood. These weren't the primitive shelters that many have imagined, but substantial stone structures with multiple rooms, sophisticated storage systems, and evidence of literacy and learning within the home environment. Several houses contained what archaeologists identified as writing corners, dedicated spaces with stone surfaces suitable for writing practice, storage areas for scrolls or tablets, and oil lamps positioned to provide adequate light for reading and study. One house, which researchers believe may have belonged to a family of some education and means, contained fragments of what appear to be personal copies of biblical texts, including portions of the Torah, Psalms, and prophetic books. The handwriting analysis suggests these were not professionally copied scrolls, but personal study materials created for use within the household. This discovery indicates that at least some families in 1st century Nazareth prioritized religious education highly enough to invest significant resources in acquiring and copying sacred texts for home study. If Jesus' family was among those with access to such materials, it would explain his remarkable familiarity with Scripture that impressed religious leaders throughout his ministry. The residential excavations also revealed evidence of what archaeologists call extended family compounds, clusters of houses that appear to have been occupied by related families over several generations. These compounds shared common courtyards, storage facilities, and work areas, creating environments where children would have been exposed to multiple adult role models, diverse skills and knowledge, and intensive community oversight of their development. The archaeological evidence suggests that Jesus would have grown up not just under the direct influence of Mary and Joseph, but within a broader extended family and community network that took collective responsibility for young people's education and character formation. Perhaps most intriguingly, the excavations uncovered evidence of what researchers tentatively identified as religious instruction areas within these family compounds. These were spaces specifically designed for teaching children and young people about Jewish law, traditions, and scripture interpretation. Stone seating arranged to focus attention on a central teaching position, surfaces suitable for writing practice, and storage areas for educational materials indicate that religious education in first-century Nazareth extended far beyond formal synagogue instruction. Children and young people received intensive, ongoing religious training within their own family and community networks. The archaeological team made another discovery that revolutionized understanding of first-century Nazareth's economic and social connections. Excavations revealed extensive evidence of trade relationships that connected the village to major commercial centers throughout Palestine and the broader Mediterranean world. Pottery from Jerusalem, glassware from Phoenician cities, metalwork from Damascus, and luxury items from as far away as Rome and Egypt were found in first-century contexts. This evidence indicates that Nazareth was not an isolated backwater, but an active participant in the regional economy, with residents who understood international trade, diverse currencies, and cross-cultural business practices. This economic sophistication has profound implications for understanding Jesus' education and worldview development. Growing up in a village connected to international trade networks, he would have encountered people from diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds, heard multiple languages spoken regularly, and observed complex economic relationships that extended far beyond local agricultural production. His later parables about merchants, bankers, international travel, and diverse currencies reflect not theoretical knowledge, but practical understanding gained from growing up in a commercially sophisticated environment. The excavations also uncovered what Dr. Alexandre described as the most significant discovery of the entire project: evidence of formal rabbinical training taking place in first-century Nazareth. In the synagogue complex, archaeologists found what they identified as a rabbinical court, a formal space designed for legal proceedings, religious debates, and advanced theological instruction. The physical layout, with its raised platform for judges or teachers and seating arranged for formal proceedings, matches descriptions of similar facilities in major Jewish centers like Jerusalem and Caesarea. The discovery suggests that Nazareth had at least one and possibly several qualified rabbis capable of providing advanced religious education to promising students. Stone tablets found in this area contain fragments of what appear to be advanced theological discussions, including debates about messianic prophecies, interpretations of difficult scriptural passages, and applications of Jewish law to complex situations. The sophistication of the theological content indicates that first-century Nazareth was home to serious religious scholarship, not just basic religious observance. If Jesus had access to this level of religious instruction, which the archaeological evidence suggests was available in his hometown, it would explain his remarkable theological sophistication and his ability to engage in complex scriptural interpretation with Jerusalem's most learned scholars. But perhaps the most personally revealing discoveries came from what archaeologists called the youth training areas, scattered throughout the village. These were spaces specifically designed for teaching young people the practical skills they would need for adult life, including not just occupational training, but education in leadership, community responsibility, and religious service. The archaeological evidence suggests that first-century Nazareth had a systematic approach to youth development that went far beyond what we might expect from a small Palestinian village. One particularly well-preserved training area showed evidence of instruction in what modern educators would recognize as public speaking and leadership development. Stone platforms positioned for addressing groups, acoustic arrangements that would help speakers project their voices effectively, and seating arrangements that would allow audiences to observe and evaluate speakers all suggest that young people in first-century Nazareth received training in communication skills and public leadership. This discovery provides archaeological context for understanding how Jesus developed the remarkable speaking abilities that later enabled him to address crowds of thousands with authority and effectiveness. The excavations also revealed evidence of what researchers identified as community service training, systematic instruction in the practical skills needed for serving others and contributing to community welfare. Workshop areas where young people learn to produce goods for distribution to the poor, training spaces for developing medical and healing skills, and areas designed for teaching conflict resolution and counseling indicate that youth education in first-century Nazareth emphasized service to others as a fundamental aspect of adult responsibility. This archaeological evidence provides insight into how Jesus developed his profound commitment to serving others and his practical skills in addressing human needs. Dr. Alexandre's team made another discovery that challenges traditional assumptions about Jesus' family background and social status. The excavations revealed that first-century Nazareth included several families of considerable means and education, including some with apparent connections to Jerusalem's religious and political establishment. Houses with elaborate architecture, expensive imported goods, and evidence of advanced literacy suggest that the village included residents with significant social and economic standing. While we cannot determine with certainty where Jesus' family fit within this social spectrum, the archaeological evidence indicates that first-century Nazareth offered opportunities for social advancement and sophisticated education that would not have been available in a truly marginal village. This finding helps explain several puzzling aspects of the gospel narratives about Jesus' early life. His family's ability to travel to Jerusalem for religious festivals, their apparent familiarity with temple procedures and religious customs, and Jesus' own comfort level in engaging with educated religious leaders all suggest a family background with considerable social and educational advantages. The archaeological evidence from Nazareth provides a plausible context for understanding how Jesus could have acquired the knowledge, skills, and social confidence that characterized his later ministry without requiring extraordinary divine intervention to compensate for educational disadvantages. The excavations uncovered evidence that first-century Nazareth was home to what archaeologists identified as a scribal school, a formal institution for training young people in reading, writing, and document production. The physical remains include writing surfaces, ink production areas, storage facilities for scrolls and tablets, and seating arrangements for group instruction. Analysis of writing samples found in the area suggests that students learned not just basic literacy, but advanced skills in document production, legal writing, and scriptural interpretation. The discovery indicates that some young people in first-century Nazareth had access to educational opportunities comparable to what was available in major urban centers. If Jesus participated in this scribal training, it would explain several characteristics of his later ministry that have puzzled scholars. His ability to read Hebrew texts fluently, his sophisticated understanding of scriptural interpretation methods, his skill in legal argumentation, and his apparent familiarity with document production and preservation all suggest formal training that went far beyond basic religious education. The archaeological evidence from Nazareth provides a plausible explanation for how Jesus acquired these advanced skills without requiring miraculous educational acceleration. But the most remarkable discovery was evidence of what Dr. Alexandre described as messianic study groups in first-century Nazareth. In several locations throughout the village, archaeologists found materials related to intensive study of messianic prophecies, including stone tablets with prophecy texts, discussion notes about the timing of the Messiah's arrival, and what appear to be speculative genealogies attempting to identify messianic candidates. The sophistication and extent of this material suggests that messianic expectations were not just casual hopes in first-century Nazareth, but subjects of serious, systematic study involving multiple community members over extended periods. This discovery provides crucial context for understanding Jesus' own messianic consciousness and the development of his sense of divine calling. Growing up in a community where messianic prophecies were studied intensively, where expectations about the coming Messiah were discussed regularly, and where the timing and identity of the promised deliverer were matters of ongoing investigation, Jesus would have been thoroughly familiar with messianic expectations from childhood. His later claims about his own messianic identity reflect not sudden revelation, but lifelong familiarity with the prophecies he claimed to fulfill. The archaeological evidence also reveals that first-century Nazareth was characterized by what researchers described as theological diversity, the coexistence of multiple approaches to Jewish faith and practice. Different areas of the village showed evidence of varying religious emphasis, including some focused on strict legal observance, others emphasizing prophetic and mystical traditions, and still others showing influence from Greek philosophical concepts. This theological diversity would have exposed Jesus to multiple approaches to understanding God, Scripture, and religious life, contributing to the remarkable breadth and sophistication of his later teaching. The excavations uncovered evidence that first-century Nazareth included residents with connections to major religious and political movements of the time. Artifacts associated with Pharisaic traditions, materials connected to Essene practices, items suggesting zealot sympathies, and goods indicating contact with Hellenistic Jewish communities all appeared in first-century contexts. This evidence suggests that Jesus grew up in an environment where he would have been exposed to the full spectrum of Jewish religious and political thought current in his era. His later ability to engage effectively with representatives of all these movements reflects not just divine wisdom, but practical familiarity gained through early exposure to their ideas and representatives. But perhaps the most significant discovery was evidence of what archaeologists identified as prophetic training traditions in first-century Nazareth. Several locations contained materials associated with the study and practice of prophecy, including texts related to prophetic interpretation of current events, practices for developing spiritual sensitivity, and what appear to be records of prophetic messages delivered within the community. The extent and sophistication of these materials suggest that first-century Nazareth maintained active traditions of prophetic ministry and training, providing a context within which Jesus could have developed his own prophetic gifts and understanding. The archaeological evidence reveals that first-century Nazareth was far from the isolated backward village that many have imagined. Instead, it was a sophisticated community with strong educational traditions, diverse cultural influences, active participation in regional economic networks, and serious commitment to religious study and practice. The village provided an environment remarkably well suited for preparing someone for the kind of ministry Jesus would later undertake, combining solid religious education, practical life skills, exposure to diverse cultures and ideas, and opportunities for developing leadership abilities. These discoveries don't diminish the miraculous aspects of Jesus' life and ministry, but they do provide important context for understanding how God prepared him for his earthly mission. Rather than requiring constant miraculous intervention to compensate for educational or cultural disadvantages, the archaeological evidence suggests that Jesus grew up in an environment that provided excellent natural preparation for his later work. The combination of divine calling and human development created the remarkable person who would transform human history. The implications of these archaeological discoveries extend far beyond academic interest. For believers seeking to understand Jesus' humanity, the evidence provides insight into how God works through natural means to accomplish his purposes. For those studying Christian origins, the discoveries illuminate the sophisticated religious and cultural environment from which Christianity emerged. For anyone interested in the historical Jesus, these findings provide unprecedented insight into the formative experiences that shaped the most influential person in human history. The archaeological evidence from first-century Nazareth reveals that Jesus' silent years were likely filled with intensive education, diverse cultural exposure, systematic religious training, and comprehensive preparation for the ministry he would undertake. Rather than wasted or empty years, they appear to have been a crucial period of development during which Jesus acquired the knowledge, skills, and understanding that would enable him to fulfill his divine mission effectively. The excavations at Nazareth have revealed not just the physical environment of Jesus' childhood, but the educational and cultural foundations upon which his remarkable ministry was built.